Well now, it seems like you've wandered too far off the beaten path there, friend. You probably smelled the bacon I was cooking up a bit ago, and your nose led you right to me, didn't it? Sadly, the bacon, it's all gone. Completely. It was a nice, thick cut, too. Though personally, I like my bacon a bit more chewy and fatty. People who like their bacon crunchy and charred they don't seem right in the head. But you came all this way out here to my little fire in the middle of nowhere. All that walking for what? Nothing? Now that just doesn't seem too fair to me. How about a story? Yeah, how about a nice story to listen to while you sit down and recover? Go on, pull up a stump, warm up a bit. Now, the story I'm going to tell you isn't one of great victories or somber ends. No, these stories involve what happens after you stop breathing. When the little light of life in your eyes simply just winks out. We don't know what happens to us after that moment, but in the case of my own mother, she's got more than a few ghost stories to tell.
Hi, y'all. I am Tetravolt's mom, and yeah, I've got a little spine tingler to share with y'all today. Um, this happened back in the early spring of 1992. I was a 20-something airman with the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Travis Air Force Base in California at the time. I spent almost 2 years active duty and got out for reasons beyond my control. But during this time, I was an aircraft structural maintenance specialist, which means basically I worked in the body shop and I worked on C-5s and C-141 cargo planes. And at the time of this incident, I was working in the refurb shop. Basically, an airplane would come in with, you know, what is it called? Issues, I guess you could say, wear and tear issues. Planes, especially in their cargo areas, get a lot of battering from cargo and all the hundreds of thousands of air miles that they log in every year. And we got this one particular plane in. It was a 141 cargo plane, and it had some issues in on the floors of the cargo area, and I was the only female in the shop at the time, and therefore I was also the smallest member in the shop at the time, which came in handy because I had these little tiny hands that could get into these little tiny places that those great big meaty man claws could not get into. Well, we got this 141 in, and we had a list of issues, and the biggest issue was some of the panels in the floor of the cargo area uh, needed to be replaced because they were very obviously damaged. But there were panels in the floor that, while the damage wasn't obvious, there was still damage. But what we had to do is we actually had to shimmy our way between the floor joists under the floor and do what's called a tap sound test. And basically, you went into the floor joists with a little tiny sounding hammer and a magic marker. And you go tap, 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 tap. And if you heard a thunk, a thud, or a tink, you circled that little spot. And then you would just start tapping, spreading out in like a bullseye pattern from that initial off sound. And lucky me, I drew the short straw just because I was the smallest member of the shop. Nobody else could get between these floor joists. They were only about 24 inches wide. And like I said, I was the smallest one. So I shimmy my way down into the floor joists under the cargo floor, and I'm doing my little tap, tap, taps, and I hear footsteps in the cargo bay. I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was one of my coworkers. And I said, "Hey, I'm down here." And I kind of snaked my arm out from under the floor and waved and went back to doing my thing. And I didn't even think about it at the time, but I later realized that nobody replied to me. And I'm going along and I'm going along, doing my thing, tap, 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 tink, tap, 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 thunk, marking spots and doing my thing. I hear footsteps again. This time, it was right over my head, and dust actually fell on my face from somebody walking over the floor that was over my head. And I scooched my way out and I looked, and it was one of my coworkers. "Oh, hey, how you doing? You need anything? Just checking on you." I'm like, "No, I'm good." "All right, let us know if you need anything." "Yeah, cool." And I went back in under the floor. About 15, 20 minutes passed. Now you got to remember, we didn't have AirPods. We didn't have iPhones. There was nothing for us to keep our minds occupied while we were doing this. This was just tedious, mind-blowingly boring work. But it had to be done, and I didn't mind it. So I'm just doing my thing, doing my thing, doing my thing. And once again, footsteps all through the cargo bay. Only it's not just the sound of one person walking in their combat boots. These are like a bunch of little footsteps running all over the place. I was like, what the heck? It sounded like there were kids in the cargo bay. And I shimmied my way out again and I looked and there was nobody there. And I was, okay, maybe I'm hearing things. Maybe my brain has gone around the bend because it's so bored, it's making up things. Shimmy my way back in, and I'm going down, going down, going down, tap, 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 thunk, tap, 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 mark, doing my thing. Then these really loud, heavy footsteps like stomped on the floor panel right over my head. And by now, I'm really annoyed. I'm like, okay, my coworkers, they're messing with me. I'm going to get out. I'm going to give them a what for. So I pull myself out of this little confined space. It was literally the size of a coffin, y'all. I pull myself out of this little space. I march my way off the plane. There's nobody on the airplane. Nobody. And I march across the hangar floor to our little shop, which was basically floor, plywood walls, and a ceiling with a hollow core door. That was our office. And I expected to throw that door open and see them all sitting around the table, eating their lunches and laughing at the great joke they played on the new girl. Threw open the door and, son of a gun, there's nobody there. I said, okay, these guys are out at the smoke pit. Okay, well, I need to take a break. I'm going to go have a cigarette, and I'm just going to read them the riot act while I'm doing it. I go out to the smoke pit. Nobody's there. There's nobody from my shop at the hangar. Well, I light up my cigarette, and I'm sitting there going, when I see these guys, I'm really going to give them an earful. Just as I'm stubbing out my cigarette, here come the guys from my shop. They made a pizza run. Why it took all 6 of them to go get pizza, I don't know. But my shop chief was with them, and I said, dudes, I am not working on the airplane by myself anymore. Do not leave me by myself on that airplane ever again. And my shop chief got this really weird look on his face. He said, hey, let's go in my office and talk about this. And I'm like, okay, fine. We go sit down in his office. I've got some pizza. He goes, go ahead, eat. This isn't formal or anything. I'm like, okay, cool. He says, tell me what happened. I told him about it. I told him about all the footsteps I heard and how every time I popped my head out, there was nobody there. And as I'm telling him, he's getting this really weird look on his face, and he kind of goes pale. And he tells me, what do you know about this airplane? And I said, just what the repair specs said. Why? What's wrong with this airplane? And by now, I'm starting to get this creepy crawly feeling up my spine. And he says, have you ever heard of Jim Jones and Jonestown, Guyana? Well, of course I had. Anybody who's into true crime like I was, and still am, knows about Jim Jones and Jonestown. If you don't know, look it up, but I will caution you, do not listen to any of the audio recordings unless you want to give yourself nightmares for 6 months. Anyway, I said, yeah, I know about Jim Jones and in Jonestown. What's that got to do with this airplane? And he kind of stopped and he looked at me and he said, the plane that we're working on right now is the plane that brought the bodies back from Jonestown, Guyana. And he said, no one will be allowed to work on that airplane by themselves anymore. I promise you. And after that, they were true to their word. I wasn't left alone, but I still had a couple of strange experiences during my time working on that airplane. My hair was long enough to wear in a ponytail at the time. My ponytail would get pulled. One time I was knelt down at the base of a passenger seat, inspecting one of the seat brackets on the floor, and I heard right next to my ear, "Hey." And when I turned around to see what my coworker wanted, there was nobody there. He was clear on the other end of the passenger section of the airplane. So, all kinds of little things like that happened, but I have to say the most intense experience was hearing the footsteps running around in the cargo bay. And I say that those footsteps sounded like a bunch of kids. Well, some of the bodies that came back from Jonestown were children, and most of them were under the age of 5. And that's what it sounded like, was a bunch of little kids running around playing in this great big empty cargo hold. So that's my story. Can't wait to hear what else Tetravault has in store for us. I just want to say thanks for letting me tell my story, and I hope this gave you guys lots of chills.
Phantom footsteps within a cargo hold are surely enough to give one a sense of unease. But in the case of USS Hornet, there's still more to tell for that old tin can. A decorated veteran, Hornet hung up her hat in Alameda, California, and took on a quiet life as a museum ship. Wouldn't be long before that piece was disturbed at night. Naturally, I mean the paranormal and supernatural. Activity within her steel halls ranges from intelligent behaviors to residual, stuck on a loop, you could say. Visual sightings have been confirmed too. Light anomalies, shadow figures, and even full-bodied visions still in their navy whites. But these spooks aren't quiet, oh no. Some like to make one hell of a ruckus. They'll throw food trays against the back wall of the dishwashing area in the mess hall. They'll move chairs or even small objects when you aren't looking. Did you just feel your hair or sleeve get tugged? Did you hear the tapping from down the hall? Are you sure that just isn't the ship itself creaking? What about those footsteps? Are they getting closer? As I said, Hornet is a decorated veteran, having served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Naturally, with large conflict, death follows suit. It has been stated that over 300 of America's fighting finest met their end within Hornet. Her history starts in the Mariana and Palau Islands campaign, a series of island-hopping offenses under the name of Operation Forager. She'd then see the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and even insist in liberating the Philippines. From Formosa to Samar, Mindoro and the South China Sea, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Hornet was there. She'd fight, her guns and aircraft downing Japanese aircraft one after the other. She'd help take America's fighting men home during Operation Magic Carpet before seeing service in the Korean War and Vietnam War. If she came out unscathed for all of this conflict, then why does her hull hold so many spirits? Why, that's easy. Hornet had the highest suicide rate in all of the U.S. Navy. Add on the slew of accidents that can happen aboard an active Navy vessel, and you have a hot pot of lingering souls with nowhere to go. Bursting steam pipes, decapitations via the arrestor cables on the flight deck, it all contributes to the simmering pot. Volunteers and museum staff often talk about hearing voices from people who simply aren't there, just talking away about the mundane with bits of shop talk from the old Navy days. Stories of things disappearing and hatches slamming shut on their own run the gambit too. Spectral officers have been seen climbing down ladders before vanishing. Museum staff even run into a spirit they've called the Dressed White's Ghost, who is simply an officer who always appears in his finest attire. There's even a tale of the Hornet having taken a kamikaze pilot on board as a prisoner after he failed to strike the carrier. He was hauled out of the ocean and kept within a cell within the bowels of the ship, where he went mad under the stress and isolation. He, too, would manage to take his own life. So don't let Hornet's old nickname of Happy Hornet fool you. Not when there's so many within her who never saw home again. And judging by those coyotes out in the distance, if you don't get going too, you won't make a home either.